The Wendigo Goes Home by Sarah Dobby Boyer. Clive Parker prided himself on eating only people who were about to die. Over his 150 years of cannibalism, he evolved not only his senses, but his mortality. While traveling through the northern Ohio, he smelled death on a large young woman with blonde hair and expensive shoes. The scent was subtle. She wasn't the one dying, but someone close to her. Cleve approached and made conversation at the local coffee shop. She was happy to oblige. Cleve looked so tall and handsome in his brown suit. Her name was Bree Shepherd, the manager of a high-end clothing store in Cleveland. Single, but looking. She liked to talk about herself, her family. Her mother was going through some sort of aging crisis. Embracing hot yoga and spin at her local gym. Bree said she even suspected her mother of shopping in the junior section at J.C. Penney, all in the effort to stay young forever. Her dad was a retired lawyer who now spent most of his time reading murder mysteries and pretending he would one day write a novel. There was the elder sister, Bonica, who was married with 3 children. Bree talked most about her little brother, poor Blake, the hopeless homosexual. Perpetually single despite his good looks and pleasant, albeit quiet demeanor, she said he studied science at the nearby university. Cleve was careful to say very little about himself, other than he was new in town, and he was always new in town. After a refill, Bree invited him for a late summer bonfire at her parents' house, where there would be extended family and friends, and, oh, wouldn't it be nice for you to meet new people in your new city? When they parted, she waved and carried the smell of death down a sidewalk lined with leafy trees at full tilt, August green. In her absence, the air smelt of coffee grounds and oil from nearby leaking cars. The sick person could be anyone, really, but Cleve suspected he would meet that person if he stuck close to the cheerful Bree Shepherd. Perhaps at the bonfire, filled, she said, with so many friends and family. It had been weeks since his last feast, and nothing. It had been weeks since his last feast, and that nothing satisfactory. Just an old woman in a lonely house that smelled of dish soap and band-aids. He preferred younger meat in the early 1900s. There were all sorts of diseases that sprung up and took people by the dozens. Such a holiday back then. But such feasts were rare nowadays, with advances in medicine and treatments. Still, there was hope for the bonfire, hope for a good hot meal. The Shepherd house was less house, more estate. 2 stories with the wraparound white front porch, navy blue slidings, and a modernized tin roof that reflected the blue sky at sunset. Bree introduced Cleve around the dozens of guests, all shapes and sizes. The house smelled of roasting meat, but still, beneath the body odor and fruit-forward wine, there waved the scent of death. Cleve wandered corner to corner with his glass of wine, sniffing. In that chair, an echo of decay. Just by the window, a shadow of illness. On the back door, a reeking handprint. He recognized the scent. Cancer. Cleve Cleve placed his own enormous hand on the back door and took a deep breath. Ah, illness. The delicious smell of a foreshadowed feast. Smell good, doesn't it? Bree touched his shoulder. Dad's roasting a pig back there. I'll show you. Now that he caught the scent, Cleve refused to let go. He followed the girl outside and nodded with disinterest at the dead-eyed pig on the spit. Bits of marinade dripped from its flesh and hissed in the fire below. A group of people crowded around a large fire pit in the midst of towering oaks. Leaves turned black by falling night. Cleve stepped onto the edge of the fire, where the younger people stood gathered. They laughed with their bottles of beer, women in light summer dresses and men in t-shirts. The scent was stronger here. Cleve's mouth watered. He saw the young man in a sweater. Despite the summer heat, the raging fire, he looked cold. His thin shoulders hunched forward as he took a gulp of beer and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He smiled when addressed. He smiled and pretended, but he knew. The young man in the sweater, he knew he was dying. But it was clear no one else did. No one looked at him with pity. People didn't make a point to talk to the dying man. Nor did they avoid him. His illness was his scent. His and Cleve's. The young man in the sweater looked up when he felt Cleve looking. He blinked twice. Huge, light eyes with a dot reflected in the fire in the center. The man bit his bottom lip and smelled at Cleve, but stopped abruptly and headed for the back farmhouse in the back corner of the yard. Cleve followed. He wandered through the sticky, humid air that smelled of barbecue and past dancing yellow fireflies. The world beyond the farmhouse smelled green, like fairy tale forests and fresh rain and cigarettes. The man in the sweater sat on the swinging bench, attached to a strong tree branch, and smoked. Cleve made an ostentatious entrance. So there is a smoking area. He joined the stranger on the bench and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. For a moment, they smoked in silence. Cleve enraptured by the cancerous bouquet. It was in the young man's brain. Cleve smelled it like a spot of perfume on a woman's throat. I'm Cleve. He reached out his hand. The stranger took it. Blake. You're Bree's brother. He nodded and exhaled through the nose. Blake Shepherd was the kind of meal Cleve was kept on living for. Hunger and lust had long since intertwined, and Blake fulfilled both needs. He would be dying soon, and he had the delicate features of a fairy sprite. He looked nothing like his full-figured sister with her blonde hair. He was slim, small, with black hair that just fell over the top of his ears, down the back of his neck. Cleve leaned closer. Can I tell you something, and you won't get offended? Blake looked at him sideways and tried to hide a grin. Sure. I think you're absolutely gorgeous. Blake smiled and chewed his lower lip. I saw you across the fire and thought, I get it. That's why poets write poetry. That's why painters paint. Blake chuckled and shook his head. Too much? They remained in solitary calm of summer. The party voices far away, few crickets sang nearby, and fireflies throbbed. in the purple hue of the deepening night. Blake put his cigarette in the empty jam jar, half filled with discarded butts. He held it out for Clave, who did the same. Clave put his hand on Blake's warm thigh. He tensed under the attentions. Would you like to come into the woods with me? Blake shook his head. I shouldn't. Is it because you're dying? Blake froze. What? The tumor in your brain. They told you it's inoperable. How long do you have before the symptoms start to show? Blake stood up. How the hell do you know that? I can smell it on you. I smelled it on your sister. You can smell cancer? Cleve stood too. I smell death. He put his nose against Blake's throat and inhaled. It smells delicious. The young man moved to step around Clave, but Clave wrapped his arm around Blake's from behind and collapsed his palm across Blake's mouth. To Cleve, the full-grown man felt like a small, breakable thing in his arms. Blake's warm breath came out in puffs, which Cleve caught in his hand. You're a beautiful creature, he whispered into Blake's ear. Blake trembled, and Cleve felt himself growing taller in his hands, larger. Shh, let's just sit for a moment, and I'll tell you a story. Something wet trickled the top of Cleve's hand, which is when he realized the trembling had turned into tears. There's no need for that, dearest. He gave Blake's body a little squeeze, but Blake groaned like he'd been hurt. Cleve lost track of his strength before feeding. He carried the sick man backwards under the cover of woods. Leaves scraped the back of his hands. Roots reached up to trip at his ankles. Cleve took careful steps until they had distance from the others. He let Blake go. Blake didn't run or scream. He turned to face Cleve, his hands balled into fists. But his wrath quickly turned into stuttering breaths. Blake backed away until his feet caught on a rock. He almost tumbled backwards into the underbrush. But Cleve caught him with 2 fingers and leaned him against a thick, mossy tree trunk. I want to tell you a story, Cleve said, but his voice was already changed, turned deeper. He looked down at Blake. Cleve, having grown inches in seconds, his fingers weren't claws yet, but with Blake near, it was only a matter of time. The dying man did not move. Would you like one of your cigarettes? Blake shook his head. No. Cleve began to walk in a little circle. The fabric of his suit was torn under his armpits. His slacks felt much too tight. My name, he said, is Cleve Packer. I was born in 1846. What? Cleve held up his finger, which was now a claw. Blake's breath faltered at the sight. He tried to back further into the tree, knocking pieces of bark into the forest floor with his feet. You are gorgeous, you know that? I could just eat you up. Cleve smiled, put his hand around the side of Blake's neck and brushed back his long black hair with pointed nails. I was on a hunt for gold in 1874 when it happened. 6 of us got caught in the Colorado mountains avalanche, and well, old Frank, he died. What we were supposed to do? We ate him. Blake closed his eyes tight. More tears fell. Our guide, this damn Awabe, he took off, said we were cursed. We were, but what a lovely curse. Cleve smiled when he felt his fangs push through his gums. One of his claws caressed Blake's cheekbone. I ended up killing the rest of my team, but I found the more I ate, the stronger I got. Now look at me. I'll be 200 in a blink. Please, Blake muttered. Cleve pulled their foreheads together and took a big whiff. He moaned at the nearness of blood and meat and fear. He was particularly fond of fear. I do people like you a favor. Do you want to watch your family suffer? That's why you haven't told them, isn't it? You don't want to hurt them. You don't want to waste away in a hospital bed for months on end and make them watch, do you? No. So let me. Cleve had to practically crouch to be at Blake's height by then. He couldn't stop not growing with the tense of a feast so close. You sweet treat, let me swallow your last breath. Blake's eyes darted back towards the direction of the fire of that house and the people that he loved. What will my family think? How about this? Look at me, Blake. Cleve suspected that what he looked like by then. All yellow fangs, red eyes, his suspicions were confirmed when Blake's lips parted and coughed out a sob. It looked like an animal attack. Blake closed his eyes. Cleve whispered, "It won't hurt at all," and pressed a single kiss into the supple flesh that had a terminal tumor. Cleve whistled and picked at his teeth as he drove towards the next destination, Pennsylvania. He always enjoyed that state, with its rolling hills and smog of steel industry. He slowed his car as he drove by a hospice, just to get a throat full of perfume, and sighed at the happy memories of the night before. Blake Shepherd, although thin, had been a lovely repast. A young, healthy, except for that one thing, cancer, and fresh. Cleve would be full at last, for a little bit, at least. But the hunger always came back, which was why he moved on. Who would be next? It would have to be someone special to surpass the young man in the woods. He pulled up to the diner for a cup of coffee. Halfway up the sidewalk, his head started hurting inside. He crinkled his brow and took a seat at the corner, where a friendly, disease-free waitress smiled at the handsome man in the suit. "Coffee, please," he said. When she brought it back, she grabbed for napkins. "Oh, honey, your nose is bleeding." Cleve. Oh, honey, your nose is bleeding. Cleve reached a hand up to his face. When he pulled his fingers away, his palm was covered in blood. He took the napkins gratefully. "1 second," he said, and headed for the restroom. He looked in the mirror. Everything seemed all right. He looked the same, medium-length, blonde coif, not a hair out of place. His brown eyes and freshly shaved chin Maybe his cheeks were a little sunken, but maybe that was just the light. His head pounded now. He closed his eyes. Something squeezed in his chest. He had opened his mouth, but breath came out in a quaking wheeze. His heart pounded, then stopped, which made him choke. Then it started again. He punched himself in the chest. When his heart stopped again, he fell to the floor. It started, and Cleve gasped for breath. On the ground, the blood came from his nose, rushed down the back of his throat. He laid there, coughing and remembering them all, so many, the sick and dying. He had eaten them, diseases and all. Apparently, one too many. Cleve rolled on the dirty floor and laughed, because maybe that Indian had been right. He really was cursed, but only by his own mortality. He thought he might have been better off as an outright monster. But Cleve Packer would never know.